Chaos is rising. After 2 successful Black Crusades, Abaddon the Despoiler intends to press his advantage. As the traitors discovered during the Horus Heresy, the Imperium of Man is a mighty beast. No single blow could possibly bring it down, but many small cuts can fell the greatest tree. Rather than make straight for terror, Abaddon means to slowly bleed the Imperium. Central in this long war of attrition are his infamous Black Crusades. With each incursion, the War Master presents his foes with a diversion, all while secretly prosecuting his real objectives. And just as the Imperium can be brought down with 1,000 cuts, even massive problems in your own life can be dismantled with the right tools, time, and professional help from our paid partner, Betterhelp, at betterhelp.com/wizardsandwarriors. With the coming of a new year, there may be big things in your life you'd like to change. Returning to everyday routines after the holidays can reveal problems in stark relief. For me, I need to stop stress eating chocolate all the time. Why haven't I stopped already? Well, that's where issues in life may require some expert perspective, a perspective on life and oneself. You can get that without any of the usual hassle from the world of therapists using BetterHelp. Unlike classic therapy options, BetterHelp aren't about face-to-face meetings in someone's office. They bring a professional therapist into your life via your phone, video chat, or even messaging. Mix that with extremely flexible schedules and a large roster of therapists, and you'll be able to tackle whatever you need, from struggles realizing your ideal self in 2025 to treatment for long-term clinical issues. Simply fill out a questionnaire to get you matched with a suitable professional, which in most cases is done within 48 hours. How and when you talk to them will be up to you. Get started via our link in the description, betterhelp.com/wizardsandwarriors. This link gives a 10% discount on your first month to help you give BetterHelp a go. 3 centuries have passed since the cursing of Corona. Once again, Abaddon had managed to achieve his goals, leaving the deluded loyalists none the wiser. Even so, his diversionary attack on Cadia had cost him dearly. The Black Legion would need time to recover its losses before launching its next invasion. Despite this setback, Abaddon had gathered precious intelligence concerning his enemy's strengths and weaknesses. Even the most arrogant of Chaos warlords could not deny that the Cadian Gate was a daunting obstacle. Taking the fortress world would be a ruinous affair, if not an impossible one. Abaddon would have to expend all his armies on the mighty Cassars, leaving him with no manpower to go any further. Yet despite its formidable strength, Cadia had one weakness. Ever since the events of the Second Black Crusade, it had become the center of imperial propaganda and self-delusion. As such, it was the perfect decoy for Abaddon's plans. All he had to do in his coming invasions would be to throw the bulk of his forces against the fortress world while he achieved his objectives. Once those goals were met, he could withdraw and leave the Imperials to celebrate their so-called victory, blind to the greater designs at play. One of these objectives came from the maddened divinations of Abaddon's soothsayers. A worrying prophecy was circulating across the demon worlds of the Eye of Terror. This omen, if true, could spell the end of the War Master's plans. Amid the mad and ravings of chaos sorcerers or captured Imperial psykers, the same words were being articulated. When the Eye of Darkness opened for the last time, Saint Gerstahl would rise from his grave to stand against the traitors. Saint Gerstahl had once been an Imperial soldier. He had given his life in defense of the Cadian Gate in the centuries following the Horus Heresy. A few years after his death, a religious cult developed around him. This worship was enthusiastically supported by the ecclesiarchy, who buried the hero on a shrine world named in his honor. Abaddon was far from a superstitious man, but years inside the Eye had made him painfully aware of the immense power of belief. The last thing he wanted was a mighty Imperial saint fueled by the faith of countless generations of zealots rising up against him when victory would be near. One of Chaos's greatest advantages over the forces of the Carrion Lord was its terrible demons, never born through aeons of the darkest thoughts and desires of the galaxy's sentient creatures. They conjured a primal fear into the hearts of men, whose minds were simply not capable of comprehending the sheer impossibility of their existence. The thought that the Loyalists could count on their own warp spawn was a worrisome one. The goal of the next Black Crusade was thus set. The Despoiler would locate the tomb of this so-called saint and put a stop to the prophecy by any means possible. Before he could do so, however, he needed to plan his diversion. A second siege of Cadia was in order, though a mere repetition of the first would simply not do. After all, Abaddon had a reputation of mindless savagery to uphold among the Loyalists. This new invasion would need to be grander than the former. The enemy needed to be convinced that the despoiler's aim was fixed on Cadia, so that all of his forces would be bogged down in the fighting, leaving Abaddon free to strike at his target. In light of this, the War Master delegated the task to the demon prince Talamin. A powerful devotee of the blood god, he was the perfect creature to throw at the walls of Cadia. Though it is always perilous for mortal minds to attempt to discern the machinations of the damned, one may wonder if the despoiler's choice of lieutenant did not have an ulterior motive. Violent rivalry and scheming were the order of the day in the hellish dimension of the Immaterium, and Talamin was a mighty player in this infernal game. Though lesser than a demon primarch, he was more active than the self-indulging fallen sons of the Emperor were. He had made a name for himself through centuries of carnage, and recently served the blood god well by reaping countless loyalist skulls during the Siege of Terror. Ever the diplomat, at least by Chaos standards, the War Master plied Talamin through false promises of power and very real promises of butchery. He successfully convinced the creature that the blood of loyalist Astartes held the key to everlasting power and victory over his rivals in the Eye of Terror. All he would have to do would be to lead the lost and the damned against the forces of the corpse god and worship Khorne by bringing carnage and death to his foes. The Third Black Crusade was thus launched in 909 M32. Just as before, vast heretic armies spewed from the Eye of Terror, this time spearheaded by the demon prince of Khorne. With them came all the horrors of hell itself. The host of Talamin was vast beyond reckoning. Abaddon had truly cemented his position within the Eye, and most lesser warbands flocked to his banner when he called. Hundreds of mutated vessels emerged from the Immaterium like flies from a corpse. Their hulls were mutated beyond recognition, and even the most astute of tech priests would struggle to recognize the Omnissiah's blessed work underneath the demonic foulness that covered them. Aboard those cursed ships, vast hordes of nightmares were biding their time. Heretics of every stripe, from lowly mutants to proud Astartes warriors, prayed to their dark masters in anticipation of the suffering they were about to unleash. Next to these human dregs, creatures unburdened by material flesh relished the time when they could finally bring havoc to the anathema's domain. A veritable carnival of murder and blood was hurtling towards Cadia, hell-bent on its complete destruction. Before long, Talamin's host crashed against the Cadian gate with all the fury of the god of war. Cadia's orbital defenses were quickly overwhelmed, and despite heavy losses, the traitors landed on the planet for the second time since it had been fortified. By now, the Cadians had become hardened veterans at dealing with the demonic. Sacrifice and grit had been bred into their very beings. Unlike the vast majority of common mortal men and women, the soldiers of Cadia could look upon the unnatural profanity of the warp and stand defiantly against it. The slavering hordes of Talamin gathered near the casters. Hell-touched blades, forever dripping fresh blood, were brandished in the air, eager to tear into human meat. Terrified hostages were butchered in front of their comrades, in profane rituals announcing the coming slaughter. Demons from the darkest pits of human imagination promised everlasting torment to the soldiers manning the crenellations. Fallen Astartes taunted the defenders with vile lies about their beloved god. Against the coming madness, the Cadians proudly brandished their lasguns, eager to die in defense of their emperor and species. Thus the carnage began. Every maddened charge of Khornite berserkers was met with overwhelming artillery barrages. Every suicidal rush of mindless cultists tore itself to shreds against miles of barbed wire, trenches, and overlapping fields of fire. Greater demons that had laid waste to entire civilizations were crushed under concentrated fire from repurposed orbital defense lasers, and entire columns of super-heavy tanks that had once fought during the Horus Heresy met their end in minefields spanning the length of small cities. Whenever a casa was breached, soldiers set their bayonets and gave their lives to the last, expecting no quarter from the archenemy and giving none themselves. Just as Abaddon had planned, the slaughter that Talamin visited upon the planet dwarfed the siege of the Second Black Crusade. While the Cassars held firm once again, millions of Imperial soldiers gave their lives to hold the heretics back. Whatever the cost may be, the Emperor's faithful defenders would never cede the holy ground of Cadia to the traitors. For no matter the vileness of the Warpspawn or the cruelty of the Emperor's fallen angels, every loyal soul knew one simple truth that cut through dread and doubt: the Emperor protects. Just as the fighting reached its zenith, hundreds of drop pods arrived into the heretic hordes. The God Emperor's angels of death had arrived. Unlike the first two Black Crusades, the Imperial response to Abaddon's invasion was swift and effective. Vast numbers of loyalist Adeptus Astartes from more than a dozen different chapters fell upon the foe with righteous fury. Bolters blared, and chainswords tore a bloody path across the sea of heresy that had come to Cadia. Leading the charge were the fearsome Space Wolves, whose primal savagery was a match for any berserker of Khorne. Talamin's wish had been fulfilled, though he could yet stand to regret it. While the siege raged on, Abaddon stood aboard the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit. Cadia burned, its surface marred by fiery craters where orbital bombardments had struck. The Blood God's lackey was fulfilling his purpose, bringing slaughter and chaos to the fortress world with all the fury expected of his kind. The Vengeful Spirit turned away from the slaughter on Cadia, its engines flaring as it prepared to breach the warp once more. Ahead lay the shrine world of St. Gerstahl, a bastion of hope soon to be reduced to ash. The shrine world was an anomaly in Segmentum Obscurus, an island of calm and tranquility amid a sea of carnage and suffering. The Saints' planet had never been attacked before. This was all tragically about to change. Abaddon looked on in disgust at the world below, an entire planet devoted to religious worship in honor of an emperor who had abhorred religion above all else. As far as the eye could see, the world of St. Gerstahl was covered in spires, mausoleums, and grand cathedrals. The emanations of countless censers created a dense smog over the streets, where sunlight had become a long-forgotten memory. Millions of addled and starving pilgrims marched themselves to death in fanatical processions, flagellating themselves and supplicating a deity that would never answer their prayers. Thousands of Ministorum adepts blared through ravaged throats the same sermons they had chanted on the same pulpits their entire lives. Grotesque singing cherubs fluttered to and fro, urging the frenzied worshippers to new heights of self-harm and martyrdom. For a man like Abaddon, who had met the Emperor and fought for his vision during the Great Crusade, St. Gerstahl was a shameful indictment of how far the corpse-worshipping loyalists had strayed from their god's vision. The Saints' remains lay underneath the world's alabaster capital. It took little to no effort for Abaddon's forces to slaughter their way into the mausoleum. For all their piety, the slaves of the Carrion Lord fell like chattel to the despoilers' armies. Not one single prayer was answered that day, as thousands died screaming for salvation. In a matter of moments, the only peaceful planet of the entire Segmentum was put to the torch. Abaddon himself desecrated the remains of the Imperial Saint, ensuring the prophecy could never come to pass. With this one blow, Abaddon scored yet another victory against an empire that was too blind to even realize it had been wounded. Meanwhile, the siege of Cadia was reaching its violent end. The once pristine fortresses of the Casses were now shattered battlegrounds, their walls smeared with the blood of countless fallen men and women. Talamin stood at the center of this carnage, the very essence of rage and death. A mountain of loyalist corpses marked his path across the ruined plains. He roared praises to the Blood God with every swing of his bronze axe, each strike splitting Astartes' armor as though it were parchment. Rivers of blood flowed in his wake, driving him to further acts of carnage. Yet even the mightiest servants of chaos have their limits. The arrival of the Space Wolves turned the tide. Gathering their strength, they fell upon the demon with the fury of a Fenrisian storm. The sons of Leman Russ charged into the fray, their frost blades challenging Talamin's immaterial wards. The mighty weapons found purchase in the demon's hide, tearing through warped sinew and unreal flesh. As the emissary of the Blood God howled in agony, the Space Wolves pressed their advantage. Talamin's monstrous strength faltered. With an ear-splitting shriek that echoed across both planes, the Demon Prince was banished back to the warp, his essence scattered and his name condemned to whispers among the servants of the Four. The death of their leader broke the heretic armies. The Chaos forces retreated toward the Eye of Terror, only lightly pursued by the exhausted Imperials. Cadia, though bloodied, stood firm once more, and cries of victory echoed from the shattered walls of the mighty Casses. Yet from the deck of the Vengeful Spirit, Abaddon smiled. Once again, his crusade had gone exactly as planned. Through his usual guile, he had not only robbed the Imperium of a mighty saint that would never rise, but he had also rid himself of a potential rival in Talamin. While the deluded loyalists thanked the throne for their fortune, Abaddon had already turned his gaze to his next target. The despoiler had all the time he needed. Before long, all the pieces would fall into place, and the Emperor's kingdom of lies would come crashing down. From its ruins, a new order would rise. Humanity would finally be unburdened by weakness and superstition, and reach the heights it was always meant to gain. The strong would lead humanity's evolution, while the rest would either rise to greatness or be left to perish in their self-indulgent weakness. And he, Ezekiel Abaddon, would shackle the immense power of the warp in service of mankind's future, proving once and for all the folly of the imperial lie. The lackeys of the Corpse Emperor could rejoice all they wanted. Abaddon would be back to slaughter their grandchildren's children until all they held dear was but ash beneath his feet. This series will soon continue, so to find out the ultimate fate of Ezekiel Abaddon and his Black Crusade, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.